you know what it is. Another Monday, another set of tournament results and updates, and so on and so forth. Without further ado, let's jump right in. Will I ever get this sort of an intro correct? We will never know. I guess we can start with the tournament results. I already wrote this into the primer, but previously the newest one was Dash, who got third out of 58, which was awesome. This week, or the past weekend, we had on the 5th, there was Sean Oakrey 14th, but as I've mentioned before, I record all of the showings with essentially my build, which is nicer to track in terms of like conversion and stuff, compared to just looking at the actual data that's on like EDH top 16. I think this was precisely my pre-upper package build, which I'm currently testing. Jonathan Tyre, first out of 12. Mention worthy that this is a little more mid-range and it lacks some combo outlets, I think, but like overall, there's a few more dorks, but there's still like Diamond Lion stuff. Some stack pieces and silence pieces. White Plume as a bit of a dead slot, but it still has solid options. But for a first place finish, noteworthy that the probability of converting off of one single Aang chain is like significantly lower because there's no Salvation Swan, and there's also no Luminous Broodmoth, and then there's also some minuscule like shenanigans where Volrath's Shapeshifter could be relevant. But still awesome performance. Most of the, like, as you can see, most of these cards are just stuff that I play, but no filter lands, and yeah, Mox Opal feels a little weird, like, but it's still always love to see an Aang perform. Aaron Embrock, unfortunately not that good of a run this time. Badger Mole, but otherwise I think this was, there was, yeah, White Plume, no Salvation Swan. It almost doubles the win rate of a single chain, so I would highly advocate for it. Not a fan personally of Panharmonicon. I've mentioned it before, but you never get to cast it aside from certain games where you're like, you already have the absolute nuts, like ginormously good hands. But then again, there's pieces that are not yet in, like Broodmoth I love to see here. Also Renegade Rallier, no Extraction Specialist though, which is very, very good, but love to see the deck anyway. Kevin Provenson, 28 out of 52. I think this one had Renegade Doppelganger. Was there something else missing? I think when I looked at this earlier, Sky Coach wasn't included here. Broodmoth was here, Salvation Swan is here. Yeah, everything looks nice. Has the filter lands as well, City of Traders. So let's see, what is the card that has been driven from the slot of Sky Coach? Let me think. No planar guide. So there's Lonies. What else is missing that I'm on? Was Gaia's Touch here? No, Gaia's Touch. And Creamwell in place of that, I guess. I think land count was the same. This is the same, this is the same. Is it just base clone or something? No clone is here. Well, regardless, very akin to what I've been playing. Then we had Dash, 32 out of 92, who had the nice 3rd out of 58 just a week before or something. I think Dash was like 97 cards, so just like 2 cards different earlier, which was like Voice of Victory, maybe in. But this was, I think, when I looked at this was like almost the exact 2. Yeah, Cream of the Crop instead of something. Land? Maybe I would assume no, not in place of a land, but let me think if I can like backtrack this. Brago is in here. What is different from my list? I always like to do these sort of little brain puzzles where I'm looking at the list and see. 2 drops are there. Yes, is there. Sakashimas are there. Broodmoth, Choir. Or maybe actually Choir was a card that was missing from some of the other lists. This is interesting. What did Dash slot in? Or rather, what did they slot out? It's also a little harder to follow this because I've changed my live list a fair bit. Like 3 slots, which is a lot for kind of an established list, so... Let's see. Let's see what the... Oh yeah, it was Glory's Protector, okay. And just the flavored choice of a different fetch land. Dimir versus Izet. Always an important choice. Well, this shows you what are the new cards I'm testing. Then we had Sean Brown, 11th out of 51, so very good performance. Sean did mention on the Discord that there was at least one misplay and some other stuff like where they maybe didn't get punished, but it's like it's always punishing when there's stuff that you know that you could have played better, but also I think it can be motivating because then you know that you have not yet reached the ceiling. And I don't think I have reached the ceiling even if I'm really close, but there are so many nuances and micro decisions in this deck. Like now that I've looked at VS and started questioning the heuristic of having a clone as the top card of your graveyard and then have a flicker creature instead, what can you do with it? Excuse me, tired after the Monday. But like you know that you can make, like, you can get better results because you could have played something better. Like personally, I think it feels worse when you know that you did everything right and still it didn't bear fruit. Because like some variance stuff, maybe something didn't go as it should and stuff like that. I guess a notable recent example is the tournament I had where it was the 3 chains. But even then, I still decide, like, when I looked at it, there was one thing that I could have done better. I could have done, like, the flicker creature. Like, essentially, if I were to hit a doubler, then I get to produce +1 chain. But like when you look at the average chains required for a win and knowing what you've seen in your deck up until that point, yeah, it was kind of crazy. But currently it's like less than 1.5. I think the chains required to win is like 1.4 or something. So basically it's closer to 1. Let's see. 1.48 currently. So, and when we think about it this way, and when we look at the average chain sustaining for 10 or 11, I think it was 10 point something. I had a math professor help me with it. And basically, when you know that you see half of your deck when you go through one chain, like on average at least, we kind of know that if you see your whole deck, you should put together a win. And the only scenarios where that doesn't happen is that you get really, really unlucky and you see your like win condition pieces like at the wrong times, and that also you would somehow kind of, I guess, fizzle. Like like the chain would have to be really weird, or the chains. So like that's one of the reasons when you look at Soul Herder and Thus and these kind of effects, when you understand that if you go through your whole deck, you should win. Even if you don't go through your whole deck, you should win. So when you look at the like chain continuer slot and you start thinking, why would I play this kind of a build instead of you know, a mid-range good stuff cards build? When you look at the investment and return rate as a concept in Magic, for example, like Rhystic Study is a card that's far more worth the mana investment in this format. When you pay 3 mana into it, you will be getting way more value from it than the investment is. Now the question is though, like, if you were to play that sort of a card in aggressive high power 1 versus 1 formats, you'd probably run into the issue where you just see that you don't have the time to do that. Like the tempo loss is too big. But when you look at this kind of format like cEDH, where card value evaluation is much different than from like traditional Magic, when you know that the game actions, the amount of game actions being taken is significantly higher than most other formats, like even higher power 1 versus 1 formats can still take multiple like much more turns or turn cycles for the game to conclude. Like sure, some game ones in Vintage can be decided on like the first turn, like if you're playing something like, you know, Jewel, Coveted Jewel, Storm decks, like, yeah, you can have the absolute nuts, or you can have like, you know, Grim Monolith and Manifold Key and One Ring, and then you just go burr that way. But still, because those formats oftentimes still have the most powerful interaction available, Mindbreak Trap is a card that's like very famous in our format, cEDH, because like there's just so many spells being played. But still, like in 1 versus 1, most decks don't win through a combo of sorts. Most win through like steadily gained advantage, or, you know, just aggressive like Rakdos builds and stuff like that. They can be really effective in terms of like denying resources with thought seize effects, and then you just have efficient beaters like, hey, here's 4 damage at your face every turn, and now here's a broadside bombardiers. But you kind of get the idea. When you look at like even Vintage Cube, when you look at Highlander formats, which is like constructed Vintage Cube oftentimes, you can still kind of figure out these things where the whole theory of like 1-to-1 ratio permission cards, counter spells, removal, and stuff are much better there, because in cEDH you just don't have the time to do that. And with time, I mean oftentimes mana. You don't have like the game state just doesn't allow you to do that. The most valuable counterspell or protection piece in this, or removal piece, sorry, in this format oftentimes is the one that isn't played. And with this thought, I just mean like the talking aspect or persuasion, where someone else is planning on doing something threatening and you're like, I have this force, but I'd rather not use it for you because we have a like player who tutored last turn, they're probably slamming a Necropotence. What are we going to do about it? And this kind of thing. And then you get to keep your counter spell, and you get to still gain value. You get to slow down your opponent's development or make choices on their behalf or whatever. And this is something that just doesn't happen in 1-versus-1 formats, because you just ask if this is okay. It's not okay. I'm going to counter it. Okay. But in this format, there's different dynamics which are really interesting, and it's just like 1-for-1 interaction is not like, it's not nearly always a winning play. I think all of us have played games where you've stopped 2 players, maybe 3 players, you've done your everything, and then there comes a turn cycle where you still stop 1 person, and then like the 2 others, they just get to attempt to win, and then there's no interaction anymore. And this is mainly because of the resource disparity. Like, you don't have 3 mana and 3 swords to plowshares to hold against your opponent's scary creatures. Your opponents, however, do have that 3 mana. They do have that 3 cards to play, and like it's much more collaborative, and also much more important to kind of squeeze every inch of value from every single card you have. Like, don't just read within the text box, think outside of it as well. What kind of value can I bring for myself by showing this card? What can I get by showing this to another person, but not the other 2? And these kind of differences. And this is stuff that can maybe be like high theory for some of you watching, but even if you're new to cEDH, these things usually come with time, at least if you have someone there to kind of explain things and give some contradicting opinions and viewpoints, and like just think about this stuff. But to bounce back from that tangent, I guess those were some good thoughts. Like, it's always nice to talk about my favorite format. But still, like, I guess the point here was that I don't even remember what I started with, but still there's a finite number of resources your opponents have to stop each player. And now I remember the mana investment. When you look at, for example, Aang, Soul Herder, Thassa, all these kind of things just give you miles and miles, like so much value overall. Like if you don't win outright, then you have a threat next turn. Now, what if you even have something to cast from your hand? Like everything. So if your comment zone already reads like cast this 5-mana creature and win now or next turn, that sounds like a good deal to me. Anyway. Silas Garretson, 24 out of 47. I think this was really close. The White Plume, it's always there. My highest recommendation to take the training wheels off and just learn the Cephalid Coliseum line. It's, once you get the hang of it, it's not that hard. And also, you don't even need the White Plume, in my opinion. Your tournament games shouldn't be going to round, like the round time. So you should be able to just flicker wisp away all permanents. This is something that I did in my previous tournament. And like, then just win. It's not likely that your opponents can do anything about it. And Alex Barro, one of the oldest names in my primer. First place out of 14. And I think this was an exact carbon copy of the list. So congratulations to everyone who played it during the last weekend or weekends. And now I guess we hop to the new stuff. Currently, I'm testing Appa again, as well as Grand Arbiter Augustine, as well as Semblance Anvil. These are all cards that I've either played before or thought about a lot, but there was some thoughts that I had during a coaching session where we were talking a bit about Brago and its nature and like how it synergizes and functions in the deck. Appa is a little similar in the sense that it doesn't provide as much of an oomph for your next turn once you end your chain on it, but it packs slightly more oomph on the turn when you bring it out. If you have 2 mana over when you cast Aang, you can restart the chain with Appa. And then if you hit something else, like say, I guess supportive parents could be something, then you have like much more options. And now if you have like Felidar Guardian and like a clone, then you can just win off of Appa because you can then generate infinite mana and then blink Appa, exile things, recast, and so on and so forth. So it's a bit like Brago in the sense that the most common mana amount to have on the next turn from casting Aang is 2. This is basically due to 2 lands, LED being the kind of a benchmark hand. So with Brago you don't use mana, but you need to attack, and Brago doesn't do anything on the turn it comes down. Appa, however, can do something when it comes down, similar to Planar Guide, but Planar Guide lines up differently. Like, you almost always get to play it before Aang, and even if you end on it, if you have 4 mana available, which can be the case if you're not casting Aang off of an LED, you just get to do a lot of stuff. I momentarily did cut Planar Guide in favor of something else, I think. Yeah, it was like I had touched the Spirit Realm still in. But the thing that I'm currently testing is just a more linear, yet again, like, okay, Boseiju and Otawara are there, but land slots, color fixing in lands, Boseiju is a little iffy, as well as like Otawara, in the sense that if you're casting a Gaia's Touch, for example, with Boseiju, maybe you don't have access to like enough different colors when you'd cast Aang and that kind of stuff. But still, Airbender Ascension, I think it's still a good card, especially for my region, where there's like more commander-centric stuff, like there's Kinnens, there's Ciseis, there's the occasional TV, there's Oswald, Magda, Arkham, and these kind of commanders where you usually want your commander out. Having those like multi-purpose tools where you can remove something and then along with it produce a permanent or something that like gives you a benefit for the turn when you cast Aang are always like, I think they're always more interesting in this deck than like outright Swords to Plowshares, because the scenarios when you're hit by a piece usually aren't that time sensitive where you would really want to have that one extra mana available. I think most of the scenarios where you see a Grafdigger's Cage come down or like Dranith Magistrate or a Wild Torpor Orb, you'd usually just wait until the end step of someone else's and then, remove it at that point. Because when you play those pieces and you throw your hands up and you're like, well, my deck basically doesn't have any interaction, so then the players start playing a 3-person game, and then you might find your window where you're like, end step, touch the Spirit Realm, go to my turn, cast Aang. Does it resolve? Does it not get removed? Okay, cool. But still, these kind of scenarios are still really bad. Like, you don't want to be in a position where your opponents have like mana engines up, they have cards in hand, because when looking at it from a realistic point, it's very rare that you would get to go completely unchecked on like turn 5 or something. Usually, if that case exists, it's because everyone has expended their resources and you still have the best commander to play. Maybe aside from like Italy, but still, like, just like a point being, whatever happens at the table, usually you can present the biggest threat with a single permanent if we're not looking at anything else, like, Kinnan, Basalt, whatever. But the cards itself, like the base theory with this trio of Anvil and Arbiter and Appa I talked about, but Arbiter, like, I don't like the card that much, at least yet, because the upfront cost is pretty steep. So when we look at this card, it's a little iffy to cast. If you're using your Mana Vault to cast this, then you really need to have 3 color producing lands for your next turn. If you want to play Aang, you need to make sure that Arbiter doesn't get cloned. You need to make sure that your Arbiter isn't removed. All that stuff. Also, making your opponent's interaction cost more, but just 1 more. If this card says, like, spells your opponents play cost 16 more, then we can, like, frankly know that your opponents can't interact with you, but also your opponents can't win. But when we look at the sentence of just 1 mana more often than not, it just means that your opponents can't interact, but they can develop and they can attempt to win. And this is true for decks like Kinnan, for like a Rograk Thrasios, these sort of expensive, like mana explosive lists that produce a lot of mana, and then they can just like ignore the extra cost while you're providing them the like protection for your opponents to not be able to interact. But the reason that I'm trying with it is that with Aang, if you have this out and you get Appa, then your Aang is free to play, and that can most often just win you the game. you maybe can clone, up, but then you can exile some stuff. Then you can play Aang. If you hit the legendary clone, you can get another arbiter, and now your blue spells like clones are suddenly 0 mana as well. And then you get to do like clone Appa, play Aang, clone Appa, blah 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 stuff. And then you can win off of that. But it's a meh card, but an alright one. Like, it's not the end of the world if you end on it. It's more probable that your opponents can't win at least, or they can't hold interaction up because you're hindering development. If you're playing Aang turn 1 and you fizzle your chain on a Grand Arbiter, most of your enemies are just locked into playing like a Lotus Petal or something and paying it with their land. But any later stage after that, it can backfire a fair bit. So just keep an eye on like this card. If you see an opponent play Plagon, for example, it's probably smart to not play this card out. If your opponent runs clones, causing a board state where you and your opponent are both like anything goes, like my interaction costs +1, -1, and then there's the two other players and they just can't take part in the game. And this can be really bad for you if your opponent is one of those decks that runs a lot of free interaction, for example, which is like Ginnan, for example. If your Ginnan opponent doesn't have to interact with anyone else, then just you letting you keep the Grand Arbiter is pretty much whatever, as long as they stop your Aang or other engines that might like benefit you. They should be in the clear. Like, now they don't need to do this whole dance on 1-to-3 ratio for like cards and stuff. Like, they don't need to manage their resources in a similar way. They don't need to try and extend at points where they evaluate the pod not to win. Like, there's so many dynamics into these things, but I hope you kind of got the idea from this. It's a solid card. Functionally, it discounts Aang by 2. Like Sunscape Familiar, or whatever it's called. I think it's Sunscape Familiar, the wall. Notably, this doesn't decrease Aang's cost by 2, it's just 1 because it's the same sentence. Arbiter, however, has them on like separate lines, so that's why it works. And then Semblance Anvil. I was on this card before. The idea was that you can generate turns where you get to play Aang, and then you can also play like a clone for 1 mana. And that would be like bonkers. Semblance Anvil should always have a creature for you to use. Even if you're mulliganing a bit more aggressively, you should probably have a creature to toss into it. But it's also true that if you want to play Semblance Anvil in a timely manner, you want to be able to cast Aang on the following turn. These two things, when we look at them like from a realistic point, Semblance Anvil requires you to pitch a card. Now, requiring colors for Aang is still like requirement. You need to have the 3 different colors. Then you start asking, well, how am I casting Semblance Anvil in a timely fashion, for example? And then we end up in this kind of a like what if and what if and what if. So as a card, like, I might play it in the National Invitational this weekend, but I don't know. I'll just see what I feel like rolling with. For my meta, at least, Airbender Ascension and Touch the Spirit Realm should be pretty good. Also, maybe some just like additional ramp pieces could be solid, but It depends a bit. Curfew could be interesting, which is like everyone bounces a creature and those kind of cards. Sky Coach Conductor also like 1 mana. You get to restart Mayhaps perhaps. But that is the big thing. So Semblance Anvil lets you play all your airbent creatures for free. And that's like the main gist here is that if you have Semblance Anvil and you have Appa, you win the game. If you have Grand Arbiter and Appa, highly likely that you win. If you have a Grand Arbiter Augustine and yet then you like maybe get to clone it, it's highly likely your opponents can't win. And Arbiter, I guess, is a card that's okay when it comes to like stack style board states. If your opponent has a Dranith and you're not able to do anything about it, then playing an Augustine, cloning the Dranith, and then playing a legendary clone on the Augustine, maybe you can just generate a board where your opponents quite literally pay 5 mana for a talisman, and that's like their whole game, and then you're still swinging things sideways. But I'll have to see how I feel about these. I could see myself just running Appa and nothing else. It was something that I've considered for MEL as well. And these are mainly just like theoretical ideas where if I were to have extra mana, what kind of chains or win conditions do they open up? For example, in the case of Appa, as previously mentioned, if you get the chain into Appa and you have 2 mana left over, and then you cast your Aang again, now if you hit supportive parents, it's highly likely that you can win because you can now play one of your before like airbent clones or stuff like that. And if you end the chain on Appa, you can exile your Aang and then next turn just play it from exile or whatever. But those are pretty much the like big things. Another big thing is the kind of discovery process with VS. I posted a new puzzle last week and a solution for it on YouTube, and you should check it out. It's difficult, but it really can kind of give you ideas on how complex the deck actually is if you're playing optimally, or at least close to it. So this time, I don't think I'll run through any extra like chains like mulligan hands or whatever. This time I think the video was just a theoretical ramble about certain card choices and the format overall. If you found this kind of discussion interesting, do let me know. Or rather, like this kind of a monologue. I'm happy to do these and just have fun with the list and keep playing. Win tournaments and enjoy. It's a very good list, even if I say it myself. If you're interested in coaching, I have some time slots that I should be available. Currently, I'm charging 25 euros an hour, but I'm willing to adjust it. Like if your monetary situation isn't sufficient for paying for that, then like I'd rather just teach. But it's also something that I value the time and effort I've put into this project instead of working on my thesis or whatever other projects that I could maybe actually get something from. But this is just a passion thing and interesting for me. But anyway, like I coached a player who's really, really good. And even then we could find like improvements really fast. So if you feel like you understand the deck well and you're playing it well, do message me. We can probably figure some new things out that you can play better. But that's it for this video. Now I'm going to chill for a bit, maybe play some Slay the Spire, and then work week continues and tournament this weekend. The top 16 performing participants from the league season playing in the national finals. So let's see. We will be trying a tournament system where everyone plays seed 1, 2, 3, and 4 one time. So it's going to be interesting. Thanks for watching and have a wonderful week, and have best of luck with your chains. See you.